They said a wild horse could never love a man, until the day one came back to save him. The old rancher was found lying in the dust, miles from anyone who could hear him. But something did. From across the empty plains, a white Mustang broke through the wind, eyes burning with purpose. What happened next left the whole town speechless, because some bonds aren't built by man, but remembered by the wild. The evening wind swept across the open plains of Montana, carrying the scent of dry grass and sage. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the sky into a wide ocean of amber and rose. At the edge of his modest ranch, Eli Turner leaned against a weathered fence post, the rough wood pressing into the palm of his hand. He was a man shaped by the land, broad-shouldered but thinning, his face etched with years of wind and quiet work. The air hummed with cicadas, and far beyond the fence, the vastness stretched into a horizon so distant it might as well have been eternity. On the ridge, something moved, a flicker of silver white against the fading light. Ghost, the wild Mustang, stood there, motionless, his mane lifted by the breeze like smoke from a dying fire. Eli squinted, shading his eyes beneath the brim of his old felt hat. "You still remember me, huh?" he muttered, his voice swallowed by the wind. Ghost didn't move. He only turned his head slightly, one ear twitching, the other aimed toward Eli, as if deciding whether to stay or disappear again into the wild. For 15 years, Eli had worked this same patch of earth. The ranch wasn't much, 50 acres of rough pasture, a corral that leaned like a tired old man, and a house built by his father when the world was still painted in black and white photographs. He didn't mind the solitude. Some men were built for it. But there were moments in that hour when the light began to fade and everything felt softer, that a heaviness pressed behind his ribs. He reached for the tin cup on the fence rail, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and winced. His chest tightened briefly, just a small pinch gone as quickly as it came. He told himself it was nothing. The doctors in town had warned him to slow down, to watch the salt, the caffeine, the long hours under the sun. But how could a man slow down when slowing down meant thinking? The sound of gravel crunching broke the silence. A blue pickup truck pulled into the driveway, kicking up a small cloud of dust. From inside, a woman's voice called out, bright against the quiet dusk. "Evening, Mr. Turner." Eli straightened and waved lazily. It was Clara Jennings, the young wildlife officer assigned to the region. Early 30s, sun-browned skin, the kind of woman who carried the scent of pine and rain even on dry days. She stepped out of the truck, slinging her canvas bag over her shoulder, boots thudding softly against the dirt. "Evening, Clara," Eli replied, his tone steady but warm. "What brings you out here? Again?" "Reports say a wild band's been moving closer to the highway," she said, glancing past him toward the hills. "Thought I'd check if you've seen any sign of them." Eli smiled faintly, eyes drifting toward the ridge where Ghost had been. But the Mustang was already gone, leaving behind nothing but swaying grass. "Only the usual," he said. "One of them likes to show up now and then. Doesn't stay long." Clara followed his gaze and nodded, her ponytail catching the light. "The white one, right? Locals call him Ghost." "That's the one," Eli said quietly. "He's smarter than most men I've met." She chuckled. "Careful. You say that too loud, and you'll start a war with the ranchers in town." Eli's lips curved into a dry smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the low murmur of the wind brushing through the fence wire. Clara finally looked down at her watch. You should get some rest, Mr. Turner. Heard it's going to be a scorcher tomorrow. I'll manage, he said. Always do. She studied him for a moment, her eyes softening with something like concern. Take it easy, okay? Don't make me report you to the health department. He chuckled. I'd like to see the paperwork for that. Clara smiled, gave a small wave, and turned back to her truck. The engine started, headlights sweeping across the field as she drove off. Eli watched until the glow faded into the distance, leaving him alone again with the vast, breathing silence of the prairie. The light was dim now, and the first stars began to blink through the thin veil of dusk. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and the echo rolled through the valley like a memory that refused to fade. Eli's hand drifted toward his chest again. Another brief tightening, a sharp reminder of the years he'd tried to ignore. He looked back toward the ridge. Ghost was gone, but his presence lingered like the aftertaste of rain. Eli whispered to no one in particular. Guess we're both still here, huh? Me and you, too stubborn to leave. He turned and started back toward the small farmhouse. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, casting a faint glow across the old rocking chair and the empty coffee cup he'd left that morning. He paused at the door, listening to the night, the crickets, the rustle of wind. For a moment, it felt like the land itself was breathing with him. Slow, steady, alive. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of hay and wood polish. A photograph sat on the counter. Eli, a woman with kind eyes, and a young boy no older than 10. Dust covered the frame. He wiped it with the edge of his sleeve, lingering on the boy's face. Sam, he murmured. You never did like this place much, did you? The old landline phone buzzed to life, breaking the quiet. He picked it up, pressing it to his ear. Dad? The voice was older now, deeper, his son's. Evening, Sam, Eli said softly. I can't make it out this weekend, the voice on the other end said quickly, rehearsed. They've got me on a new project at the shop. Maybe next month, yeah? Eli smiled faintly, though the silence stretched long before he answered. Sure thing, son. Work comes first. Take care of yourself, okay? Don't overdo it. I'll try, Eli said. Good night. When the line went dead, he stayed there a while, listening to the hollow hum of the receiver. Then he set it down gently, as if afraid to wake the ghosts already sleeping in the walls. Outside, the wind shifted direction. A cool whisper rolling down from the north. The door creaked, and Eli stepped out once more, drawn by something he couldn't name. Up on the ridge, barely visible against the starlit sky, stood Ghost again. A pale shimmer in the dark, his mane glinting silver in the moonlight. The Mustang lifted his head, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met across the distance. It was a look that said everything neither of them could. Eli whispered, almost to himself, Tomorrow, we'll fix that old water trough. You'll like that, won't you? The horse flicked his tail once, then turned, vanishing into the dark as quietly as mist over morning grass. Eli stood there until the cold began to bite, his hand pressed against the fence post, the ache in his chest dull but constant. The night wrapped around him like an old coat, familiar, frayed, and full of memories that refused to die. He whispered to the empty air, Still here, old friend, still here. And in that silence, deep, endless, and alive, the prairie answered back with nothing but the soft sound of wind moving through the grass. Snow had fallen early that year, quiet and heavy, blanketing the Montana plains in a silence that could drown a man's thoughts. The air smelled of iron and pine, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Eli Turner guided his old pickup along the creek bed, the tires cutting soft grooves into the frozen mud. He was looking for a missing calf from the neighboring ranch, a favor owed to a friend long gone, when he saw it. A flash of movement in the drift, something pale against the white horizon. He slowed the truck, stepping out into the brittle cold. The wind bit through his coat. Not 20 yards ahead, tangled in a snare of rusted wire, a wild mustang struggled weakly. Its coat was almost the same color as the snow, a soft, ghostly white, except for the streak of dark blood running down its left shoulder. The animal's breath came out in ragged bursts, each one steaming in the cold like a plea. Eli moved carefully, hands raised, murmuring low, the way one speaks to a frightened child. "Easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you." The Mustang's eyes, wild and wide, caught the fading light, eyes not of fear, but of pain and pride. He'd seen that look before, in men who'd come home from wars they didn't understand. He recognized it like an old scar. He crouched beside the creature. The trap was crude, poachers, most likely. He took out his pocket knife and began cutting through the wire, each snap echoing like the breaking of bone. "You poor thing," he whispered. The animal flinched, but did not strike. Its muscles trembled, and when the last strand gave way, the Mustang collapsed forward, panting hard, a trembling monument of flesh and will. Eli tore off his scarf, pressed it against the wound, and whispered again, "You're gonna be all right, boy. You just hang on." For a long while, he stayed there in the snow, the cold creeping up his legs, the sun bleeding out of the sky. The animal's breathing steadied, slow but sure. Eli stood, shaking out his numb hands. He could have called the rangers. He could have left it to die. But something in that silent, stubborn stare held him there. "Guess you're as foolish as I am," he said softly. "Both too damn old to be caught in traps." He walked back to the truck, fetched a blanket and a small flask of iodine. The smell was sharp, almost medicinal, the kind that burned and healed at the same time. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it as best he could, his breath fogging the cold air. The Mustang stood again, unsteady, sides heaving. It didn't run. It just watched him. When he stepped back, the distance between them filled with the sound of snow and heartbeats. "Go on," he said, pointing toward the ridge. "Get out of here." The horse didn't move. Eli laughed quietly. "Don't make me push you." At last, the Mustang lifted its head and limped toward the horizon. At the top of the rise, it turned once more. The wind brushed its mane into a pale banner, and for a breathless second, it looked carved from the same marble sky. Then it was gone. Eli stayed there, the scarf missing from his neck, the cold now a living thing against his skin. He rubbed his hands together, half smiling. "Well," he muttered, "there goes the dumbest thing I've done this week." When he returned home that night, the fire had gone out. He tossed in kindling and struck a match, watching the small flame breathe life into the room. On the mantel sat a photo of his late wife, Lydia, her smile soft as sunlight. "You'd call me crazy," he said to her picture, "talking to horses again." The fire crackled, and in that flicker her eyes almost seemed to glimmer back at him. Days passed. The snow melted into thick mud. Life returned to its rhythm, feeding the chickens, fixing the fence, listening to the old radio that mostly played country music and weather updates. But sometimes, when the wind carried just right, Eli thought he heard hooves in the distance. Then one dawn, as the fog rolled low over the grasslands, he saw it again. The white Mustang standing beyond the fence line. The wound had scabbed into a dark mark on its shoulder, small but permanent. Eli stepped out, onto the porch, coffee in hand. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "You came back." The Mustang watched him, but didn't come closer. It chewed at a tuft of grass, head high, always alert. "You're a stubborn one, huh?" Eli said, his voice carrying over the stillness. The Mustang flicked its tail, almost like an answer. For weeks it became a quiet routine. At dawn, the horse would appear, distant but there, and by dusk it would vanish into the sea of grass. Eli never tried to catch it. He only talked, his words scattered in the wind like seeds that might someday take root. Sometimes he spoke of Lydia, of the way she used to hum when she cooked. Sometimes he spoke of Sam, the son who had drifted away like all grown boys do. "You'd like him," he'd tell the horse. "Too smart for his own good, and twice as proud." And Ghost, for by now Eli had started calling him that, would stand still, head tilted, as though listening. Then, one morning, as the sun broke open the frost and the sky flared with light, Ghost was gone. Eli waited an hour, then 2, but there was no sign of him. The field felt emptier than usual. He told himself it was for the best. Wild things belonged to wild places. That afternoon, Clara stopped by again. She found Eli near the barn, mending a gate with one arm in a sling. He'd strained it hauling hay the week before. "You look tired," she said. "Been worse," he replied. She leaned against the post, her breath visible in the cold air. "Saw hoofprints by the stream this morning. Big ones. Could be your white friend." "Could be," Eli said. "He's got the land now. I don't plan to take it from him." Clara smiled faintly. "Most folks would have sold a horse like that to a breeder." "I'm not most folks." "No," she said softly. "You're not." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filling with wind and wood smoke. Clara finally nodded toward the west. "You should rest that arm. Let the land do its own work for a while." "I'll rest when the land rests," he answered. She laughed quietly. "Then I guess you never will." When she left, Eli watched her truck disappear into the dust, and for a moment he felt the faint ache in his chest again. He sat down on the porch step, breathing slow. Across the field, a hawk circled in lazy arcs, and far in the distance, a shimmer of white moved along the horizon. He smiled. "Knew you'd come back." The horse didn't approach, but Eli didn't need it to. Some things, he thought, were meant to stay just out of reach, not to be owned, only to be trusted. As the sun lowered behind the beauties, the wind carried the scent of wild sage and snowmelt. Ghost turned his head toward the sound of Eli's voice, the faint scar on his shoulder catching the last light of day. Eli whispered into the fading air, "That scar suits you, boy. Makes you look like you've lived." For a long while, after that, neither of them moved. The old man and the wild horse, 2 survivors breathing the same cold wind. And when the darkness finally fell, Ghost slipped back into it, soundless, leaving behind nothing but hoofprints that led straight into the heart of the prairie. Inside, Eli poured himself another cup of coffee, watching the steam rise and vanish. The warmth felt good against his palms. He closed his eyes, letting the silence fill him. Not loneliness anymore, but something gentler, quieter. Outside, unseen in the dark, Ghost stood once more at the ridge, his mane silver beneath the moon, the scar on his shoulder a small, shining mark of their shared defiance against the world. The morning broke clear and cold. The horizon shimmered in that faint blue haze that only Montana mornings know, the kind that promises sunlight but delivers wind. Eli Turner sat at the kitchen table, a single plate of eggs untouched before him, the old radio whispering weather reports and grain prices no one cared about anymore. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he still cupped it for warmth, watching the steam die in his hands. The phone rang. The sound startled him, sharp, intrusive, like something from another life. He hesitated before picking up. "Morning, Dad." The voice was steady, familiar, distant. "Hey there, Sam," Eli said, leaning back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. "Didn't expect to hear from you this early." "I'm heading out on a job run to Billings," Sam replied. "Just wanted to check in. You holding up okay?" Eli smiled faintly. "Still breathing. Guess that's something." "You been taking your meds?" "Most days." A pause. The kind of silence that stretches and creaks under its own weight. "You don't have to do everything yourself, you know," Sam finally said. Eli chuckled softly. "If I wait for someone else to do it, the barn'll fall before the snow melts." "Then let it fall," Sam snapped, sharper than he meant to. "Jesus, Dad, you can't fix everything." Eli's voice softened. "Didn't say I could, son. Just said I'd try." The silence returned, that old companion between them. Sam sighed. "Look, I'll try to come out next weekend. Maybe help you get the fence straightened." "Wouldn't that be something?" Eli said, a smile hidden behind the ache in his chest. "Drive safe." "Yeah, talk soon." When the line went dead, Eli held the receiver a moment longer, listening to the faint buzz of nothing. He set it down, the house settling into stillness again. Outside, the light had changed, the sun bright now, the sky wide and merciless. He grabbed his coat, stepped out into the wind, and let the door slam shut behind him. The land stretched endless, a canvas of frost-bitten grass and forgotten fences. Ghost wasn't there this morning. Eli half expected him, the way one expects coffee to be warm or the heart to keep beating. But the Tamoten hill was empty. He busied himself with small things, fixing the trough, mending wire, raking the yard that never stayed clear. Each chore was a rhythm, scrape, bend, breathe, the only kind of prayer he knew. By noon, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of hooves. Not Ghost. These were rougher, heavier. Clara's government truck appeared at the bend, her badge flashing in the sunlight. She waved from the window and parked near the gate. "Morning, Mr. Turner," she said, climbing out. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Only my lunch," Eli said, smiling, "and that wasn't going anywhere." Clara glanced toward the horizon. "You seen the herd lately? We've got reports of one crossing the southern ridge, close to private property." Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "No herds around here. Just him." "The white one?" "Ghost," Eli said simply. Clara leaned against the fence. "You name him?" He shrugged. "Seems like he already had one." She smiled. "You know, the department's been tracking that horse for years. He's smart, avoids traps, never stays near water sources too long. Some say he's got a sixth sense. Some horses just listen better than people, Eli said. Clara studied him, half smiling. You talk about him like a partner. Sometimes he's the only one who listens. Her eyes softened. Your son doesn't come by much, does he? Eli looked out toward the hills. He's got his own life. That's how it should be. The wind rattled the fence between them. Clara tucked her hair under her cap. If you see Ghost again, keep your distance. There's talk they might round up the wild bands next month. They want to tag and relocate them. Eli's jaw tightened. Relocate, he repeated. To where? State reserves. Safer ground. For who? Clara sighed. You know how it works. Paper says it's safer, so it's safer. Eli looked at the sky, where a hawk traced lazy circles. Funny thing, safety. Costs a lot more than it's worth. She smiled sadly. You sound like my granddad. Smart man, Eli said. She laughed and pushed off the fence. Take care of yourself, Eli. Don't work too hard. When she drove off, the dust followed her like a ghost of its own. Eli leaned on the gate, watching until she vanished. Then he turned toward the open field. And there he was. Ghost stood halfway up the ridge, his coat catching the sunlight like liquid silver. Eli's chest eased, something like relief rising in him. He raised a hand in greeting. You keep disappearing like that, he said softly. I'll start charging rent. The horse flicked an ear, unmoving. Eli took a slow step forward, the grass crunching beneath his boots. You hear that talk about relocation? They think you need saving. Ghost shifted slightly, a ripple through his shoulders. Don't worry, Eli said. They tried saving me once, too. Didn't take. The horse made a sound. Not quite a snort, not quite a sigh. Eli smiled, his breath visible in the chill air. Guess that makes two of us. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the sky burned orange, Eli sat on the porch, phone in hand. He scrolled through photos, a world of pixels and memories. One of Sam, 5 years old, standing on this very porch with a stick horse between his legs. Another of Lydia in a yellow dress, laughing. He stared until the screen dimmed. Then, without really deciding to, he dialed his son's number again. It rang 4 times before Sam picked up. Dad? Hey, just wanted to say, I was thinking about that fence. A pause. The fence? Yeah, might hold off on fixing it till you come by. Figured you'd want to see it. Another pause, softer this time. Yeah, I'd like that. Good, Eli said. We'll make it a 2-man job. Sam laughed, a small, surprised laugh. All right, old man. Don't wear yourself out before I get there. No promises. They talked another minute, about nothing and everything. The weather, the price of feed, a football game neither of them cared about. When they hung up, Eli sat still, the phone warm in his hand. The world outside had gone quiet again. He stood, stretching, and glanced toward the ridge. Ghost was gone, as always, but the air still carried his presence, like the echo of something unspoken. Eli whispered into the dark. We're getting there, boy. Slowly. The wind answered, low and steady. And far out across the field, unseen in the twilight, Ghost lifted his head toward the sound of the old man's voice, a sound he had come to know like the pulse of the earth itself. The scar on his shoulder caught the last flicker of dying light before night swallowed it whole. Inside, Eli sat again at the kitchen table, the empty cup beside him, the weight in his chest eased by something softer than hope, the quiet understanding that some distances can only be crossed one word, one look, one breath at a time. The next morning rose bright but bitter, the kind of cold that glittered across the land like glass. The wind carried a rasping whisper through the broken fences, and the smell of dust rode alongside it. Dry, sharp, ancient. Eli Turner pulled on his flannel shirt, buttoning it slowly, his fingers stiff with age and early frost. He stood for a moment before the small mirror in the hallway, the reflection of a man who had spent half his life fighting the land and the other half trying to listen to it. The mirror gave him no answers, only the faint ghost of his breath on its surface. By the time he stepped outside, the sun was already climbing. His boots sank into the hardened soil, crunching softly. The fields shimmered pale gold. No dew, no hint of moisture. The creek bed behind the barn had gone bone dry weeks ago. Eli had promised himself he'd fix the old water trough before the next run of livestock arrived, but every day he'd found another excuse. Not today. He grabbed his tool belt, the shovel, and a small bucket, loading them into the back of his rusty truck. When he turned the ignition, the engine sputtered like a dying cough before catching. "That's the spirit," he muttered, patting the dashboard. The road that wound across his property was barely visible now, a fading scar through the prairie. He drove slow, each turn of the wheel grinding against gravel, until the truck came to rest near the trough at the northern boundary. The trough sat crooked beside the cracked remnants of an old pump. The pipe had rusted almost clean through, and the small cistern had caved in from years of drought. Eli stood there, letting the quiet press in. He felt the weight of it in his chest, the kind of silence that made a man realize just how alone he really was. He rolled up his sleeves, picked up the shovel, and began to dig. Each strike of the blade cut into dry clay, dull and heavy. Sweat gathered beneath his hat despite the chill, dripping down into his beard. He stopped once, rubbing his chest, waiting for the pressure to ease. It did, barely. He drew a deep breath and went back to work. After an hour, he paused, leaning on the shovel. The land stretched out before him, endless and unblinking. Somewhere far to the east, a small figure moved, faint and fluid, like a wisp of smoke. Ghost. The wild mustang trotted along the ridge, mane flashing under the sun, his white coat dazzling against the parched earth. Eli smiled faintly. "You watching me again, huh?" he murmured. "You'd think after all this time you'd get bored." The horse stopped, ears twitching, head high. Eli straightened his back, raising a hand to wave. "Don't come down here, boy. Not today. Ground's too sharp. You'll cut yourself up." But Ghost didn't move closer. He only turned his head, as if to say he understood. Then he lowered his neck, grazing on the few stubborn blades of grass that clung to the slope. Eli went back to work, the sound of his shovel fading into rhythm with the wind. He didn't notice the hours slipping past until the sky began to bleach. He crouched to tighten a valve, his hands trembling slightly. The pain came suddenly, not sharp, but deep, like a hand pressing down from inside his chest. He froze, the world narrowing into a tunnel of sound. His breath, his heartbeat, the soft creak of the windmill in the distance. "Not now," he whispered. "Not here." He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. The shovel slipped from his grasp and fell with a dull thud. He knelt, gasping, one hand gripping the pipe, the other clutching his shirt front. A wave of dizziness flooded him. From the ridge, Ghost's head jerked up. His body went tense, every muscle alive. For a moment, the world held its breath. Eli staggered a few steps toward the truck, each movement slower than the last. He called out, but the sound barely made it past his throat. The pain spread across his shoulders, down his arm, a burning that no man could fight his way through. He fell to one knee, dust swirling around him. The horse began to move. First a walk, then a trot, then a full gallop. Ghost flew down the ridge, hooves pounding the earth, sending up sprays of dirt and dry grass. Eli saw the blur of white through his haze and tried to lift his arm. "Go on," he croaked. "Go on, boy. Don't—" The words fell away. His vision darkened at the edges. He collapsed sideways, his face against the cold, cracked ground. Ghost reached him in seconds, skidding to a halt. The horse circled, nostrils flaring, the scent of dust and sweat thick in the air. He lowered his head, nudging Eli's shoulder with his muzzle. No response. He nudged again, harder this time. Still nothing. Ghost stepped back, eyes wide, the muscles along his flank twitching. Then came the sound, low, deep, building from somewhere ancient inside him. He lifted his head and screamed into the wind, a wild, piercing cry that rolled across the plains like thunder. It echoed once, twice, and then again, until it didn't sound like an animal at all, but like grief made flesh. Miles away, back at the ranch house, the faint echo reached Clara Jennings, who had been driving by on her routine patrol. She slowed the truck, turning off the engine. The prairie had gone still except for the wind, and that sound, faint but desperate, a call no human could mistake for anything but distress. "God," she whispered. She swung the truck around, pressing the pedal hard. Out on the ground, Ghost circled Eli again, pawing the dirt beside him. He pressed his head against the man's shoulder once more, as though trying to will the heart inside him to move. The old man stirred faintly, a groan caught in his throat. His hand twitched. Ghost stilled, his breath fast and shallow. "Good boy," Eli managed to whisper. Go get someone." He wasn't sure if the horse understood, but Ghost snorted once, lifted his head, and bolted back the way he'd come, white lightning streaking across the dry earth. Inside the truck, Clara saw the Mustang appear through the dust, galloping straight toward her. She braked hard. The horse skidded to a stop in front of her, chest heaving, eyes blazing. "What the hell?" she breathed. Ghost turned sharply and ran back the way he came, stopping halfway to look back at her. Another cry split the air, urgent, commanding. Clara stared, disbelief turning to understanding. "You're trying to show me." She hit the gas. The wind screamed past the windows as the truck bounded over the dirt path. The Mustang led, his silver mane whipping through the air. He didn't look back again. Clara gripped the wheel tight, following every twist and turn until the figure of a man came into view. Eli collapsed beside the trough, motionless. She stopped the truck so hard the tires spat gravel. Ghost was already beside him, pacing in circles. Clara rushed out, her boots slipping on the dry clay. "Eli!" she shouted, dropping to her knees. His face was pale, lips tinged gray. She pressed her fingers against his neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. Relief washed over her, sharp and cold. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling as she called emergency services. "Heart attack," she told them, voice breaking. "Out on Turner's property, the north field. Please, hurry." When she hung up, she turned to Ghost. The horse stood a few feet away, head bowed, watching her. "You saved him," she said softly, breathless. "You really saved him." Ghost snorted, a short, almost offended sound, and took a step back. Clara moved closer to Eli, covering him with her jacket. He stirred, opening his eyes just enough to see the blur of white beside him. "Still here," he whispered. "Yes," Clara said. "We're right here." The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Ghost stepped away slowly, his hooves silent on the dirt. He looked back once, a flash of light and shadow, then vanished up the ridge as the rescue team arrived. Later, when the paramedics lifted Eli onto a stretcher, Clara stood apart, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was setting now, washing everything in gold. She could almost see him there, a shimmer against the sky. Ghost, watching. The wind swept through the field, and the scent of dust and wild sage rose once more, soft and familiar, carrying with it the echo of that desperate, unforgettable cry. As the ambulance doors closed, Eli's hand twitched again. In the haze of medication and exhaustion, he whispered the horse's name, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but enough for the land itself to remember. Ghost. And somewhere out on the ridge, the Mustang paused mid-stride, ears turning toward the sound, before disappearing into the shadows of the coming night. The night had folded itself over the Montana plains like a heavy quilt. The only light came from the flashing red of the ambulance taillights as it disappeared into the dark road toward Billings. Dust lingered in the air, glittering under the moon. Clara Jennings stood alone beside the empty field, her breath white in the cold. Somewhere out there in the hills, the wild Mustang was gone, swallowed by the same wilderness that had once given him freedom. She whispered to no one, "You did good, Ghost. You did real good." Hours later, at St. Vincent's Hospital, the fluorescent hallway hummed with quiet urgency. Machines beeped in soft rhythm as Eli Turner lay in the narrow bed, his face pale, his breath shallow. His heart had survived the attack, but only barely. A nurse adjusted the monitors, her steps hushed, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. Clara sat in the corner, arms crossed, exhaustion pulling her shoulders down. When the doctor emerged, she rose immediately. "He's stable for now," the doctor said. "You got him here in time." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't. The horse did." The doctor gave a faint smile, humoring what he thought was exhaustion. Whatever it was, it saved his life. She looked at Eli's weathered hands resting on the blanket, hands made for soil and steel, not for hospital linen. "Yeah," she whispered. Whatever it was. Outside, dawn crept in, pale and soft. The hospital windows glowed pink, catching the first light. Clara took one last look at the old man and stepped out to call his son. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Sam Turner?" "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Clara Jennings. I'm with the Montana Wildlife Service. Your father had an incident. He's at St. Vincent's in Billings." A pause, long and hollow. "What kind of incident?" "He collapsed on his property. A heart attack. But he's alive. He's stable." There was a sharp intake of breath. "I'll be there as soon as I can." Clara hesitated. Drive safe. He'll need you calm, not panicked. When she hung up, she turned toward the horizon. The sky was wide open, cloudless. And there, far off beyond the line of cottonwoods, she saw a faint glint of white moving through the grass. It was small, almost invisible, but her heart lifted. Good boy, she whispered again. Hours later, the hospital room filled with the sound of new footsteps. Sam Turner stood at the doorway, his face hard, eyes red from the drive. He looked so much like Eli had 30 years earlier. Same jaw, same stubborn set of the shoulders. Clara stood to meet him. You must be Sam. He nodded, his gaze never leaving his father. How bad? He's lucky, she said quietly. If help had come 10 minutes later, we'd be talking different. Sam's jaw clenched. Was anyone with him? Clara hesitated. No one human. He frowned. Meaning? Your dad has a horse. Wild one. I think it came for help. Sam blinked, the disbelief mixing with confusion and something else, a flicker of memory. He used to tell stories like that, when I was a kid. They weren't stories this time, Clara said softly. That horse saved him. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hiss of oxygen through the machine. Then Eli stirred, his fingers twitching. Sam moved closer. Dad? Eli's eyelids fluttered open, pale blue beneath the harsh light. His voice came rough and low. Sammy. Hey, don't talk. You're in the hospital. Eli gave a weak smile. Figured that out. Don't sound like heaven. Sam exhaled shakily, half laughing. You scared me half to death. Eli turned his head slightly, searching the room. The horse, is he? Ghost is fine, Clara said. He's out there somewhere. Eli's lips curved faintly. He always is. They let him rest, the machines keeping time like a slow metronome. Clara left to make her report, but Sam stayed. He sat for hours, watching his father sleep. The lines on Eli's face seemed deeper now, carved by both time and endurance. Sam remembered those same hands fixing the old red tractor, the same voice telling him, You don't own the land, son. You borrow it for a while. He'd laughed then, not understanding. Now it echoed in his mind like scripture. When evening came, Eli awoke again. His voice was little more than a whisper. You still fixing cars? Yeah, Sam said softly. Still fixing what's broke. Eli smiled faintly. Then you take after me. Sam leaned back in his chair, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. You're here now, Eli said. That's all that matters. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the hospital flag. It flapped gently, the sound mixing with the muted beeping of the monitors. For a moment it almost sounded like hooves, distant, steady, fading into the wind. 3 days later, the doctors released Eli into Sam's care. Light work only, they warned. No heavy lifting, no stress. Eli nodded, though both men knew he wouldn't listen. The drive back to the ranch was long, the road stretching through endless miles of grassland. At one point, Eli spoke without looking up. You believe in second chances? Sam glanced at him. Guess I do now. Eli smiled, the kind that held both pride and apology. That horse gave me one. When they reached the ranch, the place felt the same and entirely different. The porch light was still broken, the barn still leaned slightly to the left. But there was something in the air. A waiting stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Eli stepped out of the truck slowly, gripping the door for balance. Home sweet home. Sam looked toward the ridge. You think he'll come back? Eli nodded. He always does. They stood there for a while, the sky stretching endless above them. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Then, faint but clear, came the sound of hooves. Both men turned. From beyond the hill, Ghost appeared, proud, untamed, the scar on his shoulder glowing gold in the last light of sunset. Sam exhaled, whispering, "That's him?" Eli smiled. "That's him?" The Mustang stopped at the edge of the fence, head high, mane rippling in the wind. Eli raised his hand slowly. "Thank you, old friend." Ghost stood still, watching them. The silence between man and horse stretched wide, then settled into something deeper, an understanding that didn't need words. The breeze carried a soft whistle across the field, the sound blending with the hum of the earth. After a long minute, Ghost turned, his white tail flicking like a final salute. He trotted away, vanishing into the grass. Sam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "He really came for you." Eli nodded. "Yeah, guess he figured I wasn't done yet." They walked back to the porch together, the world around them painted in shades of amber and blue. The first stars pricked through the sky, and the air felt alive again. For the first time in years, Sam didn't check his phone, and Eli didn't reach for his pills. They just sat there, father and son, listening to the steady rhythm of the wind, knowing that somewhere out there, the wild horse was watching over them. In the silence, Eli whispered to himself, "The wind remembers." And when the night finally took the last of the light, it carried with it the faint, haunting echo of a cry. Not of fear or pain this time, but of life, of endurance, of gratitude. A cry in the wind, forever bound to the land and the souls who had learned to listen. Morning broke gentle and golden over the Turner Ranch. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and the sound of the wind crept through the half-open door like a cautious visitor. Eli Turner sat at the table, his movements slower now, deliberate. The heart attack had taken something from him, not his strength, but his rhythm. He looked older in the light, softer somehow, as if the land itself had pressed its fingerprints deeper into him. Across the room, Sam was pouring coffee, whistling an old tune he hadn't thought of in years. It felt strange being home again. The air here smelled of hay, dust, and unfinished stories. He set a cup down in front of his father and smiled. "You look better today?" Eli grunted softly. "That's what people say when you almost die. They say you look better." Sam laughed. "Well, you do, and you're still too stubborn to listen to the doctor." "Doctors don't know the half of it," Eli said, taking a careful sip. The coffee burned his tongue, but he didn't mind. "You heading out to the fence today?" "Yeah," Sam said. "Clara called. She wants me to help her check the perimeter. Some of the local ranchers say the wild herds have been drifting closer since the roundup." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Roundup? They're moving a bunch of Mustangs to a state reserve down south. Said they'll be safer there." Eli shook his head, the crease between his brows deepening. "Safer for who? Horses like Ghost don't belong behind fences." Sam hesitated. "You think they'll come for him?" "They always come," Eli said quietly. "Sooner or later." The conversation hung heavy between them. Outside, the sky stretched clean and endless, a cruel beauty that made everything small. Later that morning, Sam and Clara drove north along the ridge road, the truck bumping over ruts carved by decades of rain. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. "They started rounding up in the valley yesterday," she said. "Helicopters, fences, sedatives. It's ugly work." Sam looked out the window, jaw tightening. "And you're okay with that?" she sighed. "No, but the law doesn't ask how we feel about it. It just tells us to get it done." A sudden movement caught Sam's eye. Up ahead, a small herd of wild horses streaked across the plains, chestnuts, bays, a single white flash among them. His heart jumped. "Ghost," he said under his breath. Clara slowed the truck. "That's him?" Sam nodded. "It's him." The Mustang moved like a spirit through the grass, the scar on his shoulder faintly visible even from this distance. He led the herd in a graceful arc, hooves throwing up dust like smoke. Then, as if sensing eyes on him, he stopped. Still as stone. Clara lowered her voice. "He knows we're here." Sam felt the moment stretch thin, fragile. The animal's gaze seemed to cut right through the glass. Then, just as suddenly, Ghost turned and bolted toward the open hills, his white coat vanishing against the light. They sat in silence for a while before Clara spoke again. "You ever wonder what it means when something wild starts trusting you?" Sam looked down at his hands. "Means you've got something to lose." That evening, the wind picked up hard, bringing dust that rolled over the land like ghostly waves. Eli stood on the porch, wrapped in his old denim jacket, watching the storm crawl across the valley. The screen door creaked open behind him. "Fence held," Sam said, stepping out, his hair tousled with grit. "Good," Eli replied. "Won't matter much if they start driving the herds this way." Sam leaned against the railing. "You ever think maybe it's not our fight?" Eli turned slowly, his eyes sharp even in the dim light. "Every man has to pick the things worth standing for. That horse. He's one of mine." Sam didn't answer. The two men stood side by side, the storm's wind tugging at their sleeves. When night finally came, sleep didn't. Eli woke again and again, restless, haunted by the sound of distant engines, or maybe just his own heartbeat. Near dawn, unable to stay still, he pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The land was quiet again, washed clean by the wind. The smell of wet dust rose from the earth. He took the old flashlight from the porch and began walking toward the north fence, moving slowly, testing each breath. The light bobbed ahead of him, glinting off the wire. And then he saw them. Hoof prints, fresh, deep, cutting across the mud. "Ghost," he whispered. He followed the trail up the hill, his pulse quickening not from fear, but from something like purpose. At the top of the rise, dawn cracked open the horizon, spilling pale gold across the land. And there he was, the white horse, standing near the old trough where Eli had nearly died. Ghost turned his head slightly, his mane glowing in the new light. "You came back," Eli said softly. "Didn't I tell you not to?" The horse snorted, almost a laugh. Eli chuckled weakly. "You don't listen any better than I do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small apple, bruised from the pantry. Holding it out, he stepped closer. Ghost didn't move. The air between them felt sacred, fragile. The meeting of two lives that had both been bent, but not broken. When Eli stopped, the distance between them was no more than a few steps. "You saved my life," he said. "And now they're coming to take yours." Ghost lowered his head, breath steaming in the cool air. Eli's throat tightened. "Don't you let them cage you. Not for me, not for anyone." He set the apple on the ground and stepped back. Ghost moved forward, his muzzle brushing against Eli's hand before taking the fruit. The gesture was small, but it felt like grace. Behind them, the rumble of an engine broke the quiet. Clara's truck climbed the ridge, dust curling around its tires. She stopped a few yards away, stepping out with a solemn expression. "They're moving in from the south," she said. "Helicopters, drivers, traps. They'll be here by tomorrow." Eli nodded. "Then we've got tonight." "Tonight for what?" Sam asked, climbing out from the passenger side. "To give him a head start," Eli said. Clara frowned. "Eli, if they catch you interfering, then they'll catch an old man trying to help his friend," Eli interrupted. Sam looked from his father to the horse and back again. He saw the stubborn light in Eli's eyes, the same one that had built this ranch, loved his mother, and refused to give up even when the world told him to. "Tell me what you need," Sam said quietly. They worked until the sun slipped behind the hills. Sam cut through a section of the fence, leaving an opening toward the northern ridge. Clara kept watch, her hands trembling every time she heard the distant thrum of rotors. Eli stood by the gate, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his chest. When it was done, Eli turned to Ghost, who stood waiting, head high. "You know where to go," he said. "Far north. Follow the river until the mountains swallow you." The horse pawed the ground once, twice. Then, with a sound that seemed almost like farewell, he bolted through the gap, disappearing into the wild. The air filled with the thunder of hooves, then silence. Eli leaned on the post, his breathing rough. Sam caught his arm. "You okay?" "Yeah," Eli said between breaths. "Just tired." Clara watched the horizon, her eyes bright and wet. "You think he'll make it?" Eli smiled faintly. He already did. The three of them stood there long after Ghost vanished from sight, the wind wrapping around them like a promise. The stars began to appear, scattered and cold. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled, a sound that wasn't sorrow, but freedom. Eli looked toward the dark hills. "Run fast, old boy," he murmured. "Run faster than the world." And in that moment, though none of them could see him, Ghost was already a streak of white between the shadows, his scar catching the moonlight. A silent echo of survival, moving farther and farther from the fences that tried to contain him. The next morning, the ranch was quiet. Too quiet. The wind that usually rattled the barn doors and sang through the fence posts had gone still, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Eli Turner sat on the porch with a blanket draped over his knees, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He watched the horizon where Ghost had disappeared hours before. The world seemed emptier without that flash of white on the ridge, like someone had taken the last bit of light from the edges of the morning. Behind him, the door creaked open, and Sam stepped out, rubbing his eyes. He'd barely slept. "Morning," he said softly. Eli nodded. "Morning." Sam poured himself coffee from the pot that had been sitting on the stove since dawn. He took a sip, grimaced. "Cold." "Coffee don't need to be hot to do its job," Eli said. His voice carried that same half-smile he'd used when Sam was a boy caught sneaking out of chores. Sam leaned against the railing. The air felt heavy, not with heat, but with something thicker, waiting, worry, regret. You think he made it? Eli didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands that still bore faint tremors when he tried to lift the cup. If any creature can outrun the world, he said at last, it's him. They both fell silent. The words that might have followed stayed caught somewhere between them, the way they always had. Too many things left unspoken, too many years gone to pride and distance. By noon, Clara's truck came down the drive, a cloud of dust following in its wake. She parked, stepped out, and removed her sunglasses. Her eyes said everything before she spoke. They started the roundup early this morning, she said. They came through the South Valley with helicopters. It's bad, Eli. They're driving the herds north. Your ridgeline's the last stretch of open ground. Eli's grip tightened on the cup until his knuckles whitened. You saying they're coming through my land? Within the hour, Clara said quietly. They won't stop for fences. Sam looked at his father. We did what we could. He's gone, Dad. You gave him his chance. Eli's jaw worked. He set the cup down and stood, slower than before, one hand on the post for balance. If he's anywhere near, those choppers will push him back this way, and if that happens, they'll corner him here. Then let them handle it, Sam said. You can't. Eli turned, his voice low but steady. I'm not letting him get caught again. Not after everything. Clara glanced between them, the tension thick as the gathering wind. If you're going out there, I'm coming too. No, Eli said. You're the only one who can keep them off my property long enough for him to find his way out. Clara hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. You're asking me to look the other way? I'm asking you to trust me, Eli said. Sam cursed under his breath. You can barely stand, Dad. You're not going anywhere. Eli looked at him with a small, tired smile. You sound just like your mother when she was mad at me. Before Sam could answer, Eli reached for his old hat hanging on the porch rail. The brim was frayed, the leather sweatband dark with years of use. He settled it on his head like it belonged there. And it did. I'll be fine, he said. But Sam wasn't convinced. He followed anyway. The two men climbed into the old truck, the engine coughing awake. Clara stayed behind, pacing, her radio buzzing with updates from the roundup crews. She spoke into it sharply, giving vague directions, buying them time without saying why. Up on the ridge, the sound came first. A low mechanical hum, then the chop of rotor blades slicing through the stillness. Eli parked the truck near the broken fence line, and both men stepped out. The wind from the approaching helicopter pushed dust into their eyes. There! Sam shouted, pointing. Across the open valley, a streak of white tore through the grass, Ghost running flat out, his mane a banner of defiance. Behind him, the air shimmered with the noise of pursuit. Two riders on ATVs followed from a distance, and above, the helicopter's shadow swung like a hawk over prey. Damn it, Sam breathed. They'll run him into the canyon. Eli's heart hammered painfully in his chest, but he started forward anyway, stumbling down the slope. No, they won't. Dad, stop! Sam ran after him, catching his arm. You can't. Let me go, son, Eli said, voice hoarse. I can still do one thing right. Sam froze. The old man's words hit like a confession years overdue. He loosened his grip. Eli stepped forward, cupping his hands to his mouth. Ghost! He shouted, the sound carried off by the wind. The Mustang veered slightly, his head jerking toward the familiar voice. Eli shouted again, louder. This way! For a breathless moment, it seemed impossible, but Ghost turned. His stride faltered, then found direction again, cutting toward the ridge where Eli stood. The helicopter followed, its rotor wash flattening the grass in violent circles. Eli waved his arms, stumbling closer to the open gap in the fence Sam had left days before. "Come on, boy, right here!" Ghost thundered closer, every muscle alive with power. The sound of his hooves hit the ground like drum beats, the air shaking with the force of it. Just as he neared the fence, Eli stepped aside, his hand brushing the horse's shoulder as he passed. A flash of contact, brief and electric. Ghost cleared the gap in a single bound and vanished into the northern valley beyond. The helicopter banked hard, trying to follow, but the ridge blocked its path. Eli stood, breathless, watching the white blur fade into freedom. His chest ached, sharp and hot, but his eyes shone. "That's it," he whispered. "You run. You keep running." Sam reached him seconds later. "Dad. Jesus, you're pale. Sit down." Eli sank to one knee, gripping the fence post for balance. "He's safe now," he said between breaths. From behind them, Clara's truck appeared, tires skidding in the dust. She jumped out, running toward them. "You have to get out of here. They're sweeping this side next." Sam crouched beside his father, panic rising. "He's not okay." Eli waved him off weakly. "Don't make a fuss. I'm fine." But he wasn't. The pain was back, deep, throbbing, pulling at his lungs. Clara knelt beside him, eyes wide. "We need to get you home." He shook his head. "Not yet." He looked toward the horizon where Ghost had disappeared, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "Let him go first." They stayed like that, until the sound of the helicopter faded completely. Only then did Eli allow Sam to help him to his feet. Together, they walked back to the truck, slow and deliberate. Back at the house, Clara made tea while Sam settled his father onto the porch chair. The sky was beginning to darken, streaked with violet and gold. The land, once restless, now felt calm, as if exhaling after holding its breath all day. Eli sipped the tea, grimacing at the taste. "Never liked chamomile," he muttered. "You're welcome," Clara said dryly, folding her arms. He smiled faintly. "You ever notice," he said after a moment, "that the best things in life don't stay? They come, they leave, and they change you in the space between." Clara looked at him carefully. "You're not talking about horses, are you?" "Not entirely." The air grew still. Sam sat nearby, his expression unreadable. The old man's words lingered between them like fading smoke. That night, long after Clara left, Sam sat beside his father again. The lamp cast a small circle of light on the porch. The crickets had started singing, the sound soft and endless. Eli broke the silence first. "I wasn't always a good father." Sam didn't look up. "You did your best." "I did what I thought was best," Eli corrected. "That's not the same thing." Sam turned to him then. "You taught me how to work, how to fight for something that matters. I'd say that counts for a lot." Eli's eyes shone faintly in the lamplight. "You turned out better than I deserved, son." The words hung there, unpolished, raw, true. Sam looked out toward the dark horizon, where somewhere beyond the hills a white horse ran free. "Guess we both found our second chances," he said. Eli leaned back in his chair, the ache in his chest easing for the first time all day. "Yeah," he murmured. "We did." The wind stirred again, gentle and cool, carrying the scent of wild sage through the open door. Neither man spoke after that. There was no need. Everything that had been left, unsaid, had already been heard, and far away, across the sleeping fields, the faint echo of hooves rolled through the night. Steady, strong, and free. Snow returned to the Montana plains with a gentleness that almost felt like forgiveness. The first flakes drifted down in slow spirals, touching the cracked earth and melting before they could settle. By afternoon, the world had turned quiet and white, each sound swallowed by the blanket of cold. Eli Turner sat by the window, wrapped in an old wool sweater, the one Lydia had knitted long before her hands began to tremble. He watched the snow fall, as though the sky itself were remembering him. Slowly, softly, without judgment. The events of the roundup already felt distant, blurred by the hush of winter. Ghost had vanished into the wild weeks ago, and though Eli told himself the Mustang was free, a small part of him still listened for hooves on the ridge each morning. He would wake before dawn, sit by the kitchen stove with a cup of black coffee, and stare through the frost-coated glass at the endless white. Some mornings, the wind would whistle through the chimney just right, and for a heartbeat, he'd swear he heard that cry again, the one that had saved his life. "Dad?" Sam's voice broke through the quiet. He stood in the doorway, a stack of mail in his hands. "You didn't tell me the bank sent another notice." Eli didn't turn. "They always send notices. Keeps them busy through the holidays." "Dad," Sam said, stepping closer, dropping the envelope on the table. "You can't keep ignoring this. You're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I can help. I've got some savings." Eli cut him off with a shake of the head. "I didn't keep this land just to hand it over when things got tight. This place is all I've got left that still listens when I talk." Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You could sell the north pasture. It's nothing but scrub anyway. Maybe lease it for wind turbines. Renewable energy pays decent now." Eli smirked. "Wind energy, huh? So I'd get paid for what's been beating the hell out of me for 60 years? Sam almost smiled, but there was frustration behind it. "I'm serious. You've got to think about what comes next." "What comes next is another sunrise," Eli said simply. "Everything else can wait its turn." The wind rattled the panes, and for a long while, neither spoke. The smell of firewood and coffee filled the small house. Sam finally sank into the chair across from his father, the wood creaking under his weight. "Clara called," he said after a moment. "She said the state finished relocating the herds. The roundup's over." Eli's gaze drifted to the window again. And they didn't find him. Ghost. Not a trace. Eli let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The corners of his mouth lifted. "Good." "Good?" Sam frowned. "You're happy he's out there alone in this weather?" "Better cold than caged," Eli said. The rest of the day moved in slow rhythms. Sam spent it fixing the gutters and clearing snow from the barn roof, while Eli sat near the fire, sorting through old boxes of photographs. He found Lydia's letters tied with twine, Sam's childhood drawings of horses and trucks, even the old brass buckle from his rodeo days. Each artifact was a small heartbeat from a life already lived. When the sun began to set, the world outside turned the color of copper. Eli stepped onto the porch, leaning on his cane. The cold bit at his cheeks, but the air was so clean, it felt like something holy. Across the field, the snow glowed faintly blue in the dying light. He didn't hear the sound at first, the soft crunch of hooves breaking through the snow, until it was close enough to be real. He turned, breath catching. At the edge of the pasture, a shape emerged from the white. Ghost. For a moment, Eli thought his mind was playing tricks again. But then the horse moved closer, slow and deliberate, steam curling from his nostrils. The scar on his shoulder was darker now, a faint line of memory beneath the pale coat. "Well, I'll be damned," Eli whispered. Ghost stopped a few yards away, head high, mane dusted with snowflakes that glittered like frost. His eyes, dark and endless, locked on Eli's. "You came back," Eli said softly, voice trembling. "Didn't I tell you to stay gone?" The horse snorted, pawing at the snow, as if to say, "You didn't mean it." Eli laughed, a quiet, breathless sound that turned to mist in the cold air. "Yeah," he admitted. "Guess I didn't." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an apple. "Still got one left." He tossed it gently. It landed near Ghost's hooves. The Mustang lowered his head, sniffed it, then took it delicately between his teeth. When he looked up again, his breath mingled with Eli's, man and animal framed in the faint light of dusk, two survivors of different storms. Behind them, the door creaked open. Sam stood frozen in the doorway, disbelief plain on his face. "Dad," he said softly, "is that—" "It's him," Eli said. "He's back." Sam stepped onto the porch, moving slowly so as not to startle the horse. "I thought he'd never come near people again." Neither did I. The three of them stood there in the falling snow, bound by something too quiet to name. After a moment, Ghost turned his gaze toward Sam, then back to Eli, then flicked his tail and trotted toward the fence line. He paused once more before the open gate. Eli smiled. "Go on now. You don't owe me anything." Ghost stood still for a moment longer, then lifted his head to the wind. It carried the faint scent of cedar and smoke from the fireplace. Home, but not his. With one final look, he turned and disappeared into the white, leaving behind only the echo of hooves and a scattering of hoofprints that faded even as the snow fell. Inside, Eli sank into his chair by the fire, his body heavy, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. Sam sat across from him, still shaken by what he'd seen. "He came back," Sam said again, almost to himself. Eli nodded. "He always finds his way." The flames crackled, painting the room in shades of gold and shadow. Outside, the storm thickened, but the house felt warmer somehow, steadier. Eli closed his eyes, letting the sounds of winter fill the silence. The whisper of snow against the window, the low hum of wind through the chimney, and the steady heartbeat that, for now, still kept time with the earth. He thought of Ghost, of the way the horse had stood there, unafraid, alive, and realized that maybe freedom wasn't about running. Maybe it was about knowing when to come back. As the fire dimmed, Sam looked over at his father, who had drifted into sleep. The old man's face was peaceful, the faintest smile still resting on his lips. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, wrapping the land in a quiet grace that asked for nothing and forgave everything. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone Mustang moved through the storm, his white coat blending with the world around him, his breath steady, his spirit unbroken. Freedom had a sound tonight, the hush of snow, the whisper of wind, and the memory of a bond that refused to fade. The thaw came slow that year, as if the land was reluctant to wake. The snow melted first from the high ridges, trickling down into shallow streams that cut new veins through the earth. The smell of wet soil carried across the plains, the scent of change, fragile and raw. Eli Turner stood at the fence one morning, his hand resting on the top rail, watching the water pool around the roots of the cottonwoods. His breath hung in the air, white and thin, but his heart beat steady. Winter had nearly taken him, twice. The cold had worsened his breathing, but he'd refused to leave the ranch. A man should stay where the land still knows his name, he'd told Sam, who'd driven up every other weekend with groceries and a list of things to fix. Now the two of them worked side by side again, repairing the East Corral. Sam held the boards steady while Eli hammered, slower than before, but with the same stubborn precision. "You don't have to keep doing this," Sam said. "I can finish the rest." Eli grunted. "You think I'm going to sit around while my son does all the work? I'd die of boredom before the heart gives out." Sam smiled, shaking his head. "You're impossible." "Runs in the family," Eli said, eyes glinting. They fell into silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of the hammer and the murmur of wind. Overhead, geese carved a V across the sky, heading north. The seasons were shifting. That afternoon, Clara Jennings arrived, her government truck pulling up beside the barn. She stepped out, brushing mud from her boots. "You're hard to find these days, Mr. Turner." Eli leaned against the fence. "You folks still chasing ghosts out there?" She smiled faintly. "As a matter of fact, yes. We've had reports. A lone white Mustang sighted near the river bend, 20 miles north." Sam's head snapped up. "Ghost? Could be," Clara said. "Locals say he's been keeping close to a small herd. Maybe he found his place." Eli looked toward the horizon. "He always had one. Just took him a while to remember." Clara studied him quietly. "You know, the department's not thrilled about what happened last fall. But between us—" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "I didn't tell them everything." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "Because some things belong to the land, not the ledger." She smiled softly. "And because not everything wild needs saving." Eli nodded, a small spark of gratitude in his tired eyes. "You ever think of quitting all that red tape and coming to work fixing fences?" Clara chuckled. "I'd last about a week before losing my mind." "Then you'd fit right in," Eli said. When she left, the air felt warmer, easier. Sam turned to his father. "You think she's right? That he found where he belongs?" Eli picked up his hammer again, setting another nail. "Every living thing belongs somewhere, son. Sometimes it's just not where you started." As the days lengthened, the ranch began to breathe again. The pastures greened, the horses in the barn grew restless, and even the old windmill found its song. Sam spent his days fixing what winter had broken, his nights sitting on the porch with his father. They didn't talk much anymore. They didn't need to. One evening, a light rain swept across the land, leaving behind a smell that stirred something deep in Eli's chest. He stood outside, letting the mist settle on his face. From the far ridge came the faintest sound. Hooves, distant but familiar. He turned, searching the horizon. There. A white shape moved through the gray, slow and deliberate, as if testing the ground after months away. Ghost. Eli's breath caught. "Sam," he called softly. "Come see this." Sam stepped out, blinking against the drizzle. "Is that?" Eli nodded. "He's back again." Ghost stood at the far edge of the field. his coat damp and glimmering, his head turned toward them. The scar on his shoulder was lighter now, almost gone. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Eli raised his hand in a slow, familiar gesture. "You remember," he said quietly. The horse flicked an ear. Then, instead of turning away, he took a step forward, and another. Sam's eyes widened. "He's coming closer." Eli felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, but awe. He's not afraid anymore. When Ghost reached the fence, he stopped just beyond arm's length. His breath steamed in the cool air, curling between the rails. Eli took a slow step, closer, his boots sinking into the damp earth. "It's all right, boy," he said. "You're home." The horse leaned forward, muzzle brushing the old man's sleeve. For a second, the world seemed to still, the wind, the rain, even time itself. Sam stood motionless, afraid to breathe. Eli let his hand rest against Ghost's cheek, the warmth of life pulsing through both of them. "You're safe," he whispered. "Nobody's gonna cage you here." Ghost exhaled, a long, low breath that sounded almost like relief. Then he lifted his head, looking past Eli toward Sam. The younger man stepped closer, hesitating. The horse didn't move away. For the first time, Sam reached out and touched him, brief, gentle, reverent. Eli smiled. "Guess he trusts you now." Sam swallowed hard. "Guess he trusts us." They stood like that until the rain stopped and the last light slipped behind the hills. Then Ghost pulled away, turning toward the open field. Eli didn't call after him this time. He just watched as the Mustang trotted off, his white coat fading into the gray twilight. Later that night, father and son sat by the fire again. The room smelled of rain-soaked wood and coffee. Eli stared into the flames, his voice quiet but steady. "He keeps coming back," he said, "not because he has to, because he wants to." Sam nodded. "You think that's what freedom is?" Eli considered. Maybe freedom isn't about leaving. Maybe it's about choosing to stay. The words settled between them like embers, glowing long after they were spoken. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the house, not fierce anymore, but tender, almost like a lullaby. Sam glanced at his father, who was staring out the window, eyes distant. "You okay?" he asked. Eli smiled faintly. "Yes, son. I'm exactly where I need to be." The fire crackled. The rain started again, tapping gently on the roof. Somewhere beyond the dark, the Mustang's hooves whispered through the wet grass, neither leaving nor staying, just moving with the rhythm of the earth. And for the first time in years, Eli didn't feel torn between what was wild and what was home. For the first time, he felt whole. Spring came like a quiet apology, slow, tender, full of second chances. The plains turned green again, the snowmelt feeding small creeks that sang softly through the fields. Wildflowers stretched shyly toward the light, dotting the pastures in small bursts of yellow and violet. Eli Turner sat on the porch with his hat tipped low, a mug of coffee cooling beside him. The years had caught up with him, but his spirit seemed untouched. The lines on his face told the story of a man who had lived not perfectly, but completely. Across the field, Sam was mending a gate while humming under his breath. He worked differently now, slower, calmer, less driven by the urgency that used to mark his every move. The ranch no longer felt like a burden. It felt alive again, cared for, awake. When the screen door creaked open, Clara Jennings stepped out, her hair tousled by the breeze. She'd been visiting every few weeks, checking on Eli, staying for coffee, and long silences that said more than words ever could. "Morning, gentlemen," she greeted, her boots thudding softly on the porch steps. "Morning," Eli said, tipping his hat. "You're up early for a Saturday." "Government paperwork doesn't sleep," she replied. "But I needed a break. Thought I'd see how the old man's holding up." Eli smirked. "Still breathing. The doctor says that counts as progress." Clara laughed, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "You two ever think about putting up a sign? Turner Ranch, where miracles and bad coffee happen. Could make a fortune in tourism." Sam glanced up from the gate, grinning. "She's got a point, Dad." "Tourists," Eli scoffed. "They'd get one look at this place and drive back to their hotels in Bozeman." Clara leaned back, smiling. "Maybe, but I think they'd stay for the stories." Eli didn't answer. He just stared out toward the ridge, where the sunlight painted long strokes across the grass. "Stories don't belong to people like me," he said softly. "They belong to what we leave behind." The conversation faded into easy quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its lonely song. As the day stretched on, the three of them worked side by side, Sam with the tools, Clara helping gather feed, Eli giving directions from the porch that no one really needed, but everyone listened to anyway. Around mid-afternoon, Clara went into town for supplies, and Sam came to sit beside his father. "Feels different this year," Sam said. "Lighter." Eli nodded slowly. "That's what happens when you stop running from the ghosts and start making peace with them." Sam smiled faintly. "You mean Ghost?" Eli chuckled. "Him too." The sun began to sink, turning the sky to gold. The wind softened, carrying the scent of sage and rain. And then, as if the day itself had been waiting for this moment, a figure appeared on the ridge. White against the burning light, mane flickering like flame. Sam stood. "Dad." Eli didn't move. "I see him." Ghost descended the slope in a slow, deliberate trot, hooves stirring dust that caught the sunlight like sparks. He was thinner than before, older maybe, but still proud, still every bit the creature of wind and fire that he'd always been. When he reached the edge of the fence, he stopped and looked straight at Eli. Clara's truck pulled into the drive just then, tires crunching on gravel. She climbed out, frozen mid-step. "Is that—" Eli raised a hand. "Yeah, that's him." The three of them stood there, silent, as Ghost took another step forward. The horse's breath came in slow clouds. His eyes, dark as wet earth, reflected the porch light flickering behind them. Eli set his mug aside and rose carefully, leaning on his cane. "Easy now," Sam said. "I'm fine," Eli murmured. "Let me have this one." He walked toward the fence, each step measured but sure. The setting sun stretched his shadow long behind him, merging with the horses across the ground. Two silhouettes touching before the bodies ever did. When Eli reached the fence, he stopped. "You came back again," he said softly. "Always thought you were smarter than that." Ghost gave a soft snort, the kind that sounded more like amusement than protest. Eli smiled. "Yeah, me too." For a long time, man and horse simply looked at each other. No words, no movement, just the hum of the wind and the rustle of the tall grass around them. Then Ghost stepped closer, pressing his forehead lightly against Eli's arm. Clara covered her mouth. Sam turned away, pretending to check the sky. Eli reached up, fingers brushing through the horse's mane. "I guess we both outlived our legends, huh?" The horse lifted his head, eyes catching the light. Eli sighed. "You don't owe me a thing, boy. You gave me more than I deserved. You gave me back my son." He looked over his shoulder at Sam, who met his gaze, eyes shining in the fading light. Ghost shifted his weight, exhaling softly. Eli leaned on the fence, his voice little more than a whisper. "You can go now. Wherever you're headed, it's yours." But Ghost didn't move. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, standing still beside the man. Staying, not because he was told to, but because he chose to. The sun finally slipped beneath the horizon, painting everything in gold and crimson. The sky looked alive, as if the world itself was on fire. Eli felt the warmth against his skin, but it wasn't the sun he felt. It was peace. When the last light faded, Ghost turned and began to walk away, slow and sure. Eli watched until the Mustang became a pale outline against the dark. Then he whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Run free." He stayed at the fence long after Ghost disappeared. The air cooled, stars began to bloom overhead, and the first hint of night spread across the valley. Sam walked up quietly beside him. "You okay, Dad?" Eli smiled, his voice low. "Yeah. For once in my life, I'm exactly where I should be." They walked back toward the porch together, the sound of their boots lost in the grass. Clara waited for them there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want this," she said. Eli took it with a nod. "You always know." They sat together under the wide Montana sky. The stars were brighter than they'd been in years, scattered like broken glass. No one spoke for a long time. Then Eli leaned back, sighing deeply. "You ever notice," he said softly, "how quiet the world gets right before it forgives you?" Sam looked at him, puzzled. "Forgives you for what?" "For not understanding sooner," Eli said. Clara smiled, eyes glistening. "I think it already has." The night stretched on, filled with the low hum of crickets and the whisper of wind over the prairie. Somewhere out there, Ghost's silhouette lingered on a distant hill, a pale guardian against the horizon, still watching, still listening. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, Eli closed his eyes, a small smile frozen on his face. His breathing slowed, softened, until it matched the rhythm of the wind. Sam noticed first. "Dad?" he whispered. Clara's hand found his shoulder, steady but gentle. Neither spoke again. Outside, the light grew stronger, spilling over the fence, the barn, the fields that had been his whole life. And there, in that first breath of morning, the land seemed to move, alive, eternal, remembering. On the ridge, Ghost turned his head toward the sunrise, lifted his muzzle to the sky, and released a long, quiet whinny that rolled through the valley like a prayer. It wasn't grief. It was gratitude. And when the sound faded, the plains held it. The wind carried it, and the world, for just a moment, felt still enough to listen. If this story touched something in you, tell me what you felt when the horse came back. I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more true, heartfelt stories waiting for you right here.